TR.
Too slow.
The title is true. After years and years of pulling sumo on this channel, perhaps inspiring hundreds, maybe thousands of people to go down a similarly dark path, I am now done with pulling sumo for the rest of my life. Now, there's a handful of reasons as to why, but most importantly, I want to make this video because I believe a lot of people are going through a similar thing in my era of powerlifting, where we have to decide, what are we really doing? And for how long? So for example, with myself, I'm 32 right now. I'm gonna turn 33 in April of next year. So, I got a fair bit away, but it is coming up. And overall, I just have to think, what's the point?
It's all a waste of time.
Well, probably.
You have to find your why when it comes to training. And right now, one thing that I notice a lot when it comes to themes of trends as far as fitness is I actually think people are going too far of a reaction. So a lot of times we see powerlifters go from competing super seriously for a couple of years, and then now there's this trend of hybrid training, for example, of doing distance running and then also doing some powerlifting and then also doing some bodybuilding. And unless you're adding in a little TRT for that extra recovery, odds are you're not going to hit impressive PRs really in any of them if you're pursuing all of them at once. And that's not to say it's impossible, and that's not to discourage it whatsoever. But what I am saying is I think that there is a better solution to slowly modify your goals in a way that's more exciting, rather than making sudden changes and then you lose a lot of strength and then you try to come back to it and then you lose it again and having this pendulum swing irrationally. So that is ultimately why I'm making a subtle shift into focusing on the deficit deadlift. That is going to be my primary lift for pulls, hands down. And I'll still be running my own programs on the Candido Forever program. For example, leading into that 585, that was actually the first training cycle I ever did on the deficit deadlift. Before that training cycle, and this is only a 4-week block, before that, I actually never pulled over 500 pounds on a deficit deadlift ever in any context. Even when I was a conventional deadlifter in the junior division and I pulled like 628 or 622 at IPF Worlds in 2014, I never really trained deficit deadlifts. So that is one thing that's really exciting is when you start with a blank slate, but at the same time, you don't go West Side style where you're rotating a ton of lifts, still honing in as if it's my competition sumo. So what I'm going to do moving forward is have a goal of deficit deadlifting with 2-plate deficit, 300 kilograms. That is my main goal. If I could hit 300 kilograms at around, let's say 195 pounds body weight, then I'd be in an extremely good position, first of all, to set some all-time deadlift PRs. And I also will probably be in a pretty good position to off-the-floor conventional deadlift over 700 pounds if I do hit a 300 kilogram deficit deadlift. Honestly, I would say my minimum goal for 4 weeks from now, because I am going to then push to an RP 9.5, RP 10 single relatively soon. It's basically going to be an 8-week phase. And it's similar to the Candido 10-week program, just abridged by a week for those curious. So I do paused, beltless deficit deadlifts for 3x4 on my secondary day. And then I have the competition day, and it was 3x5 back off volume with the singles ramping up from 5, 6, 7, 8. Reset. Now we're going to go 6, 7, 8 in 9.5, maybe 10 at that end there. So if I am able to even hit 630 pounds or 640 pounds, then honestly, I'm going to be in a pretty good position to long-term still hit that 300 kilograms. And then, like I said, long-term maybe it'd be something like 716 conventional deadlift in my 190s. And then I'd really start to seriously consider, doing some type of push-pull meet and just see if I can hit like a DOTS PR or maybe go down all the way to 183 and just be more muscular and try to pull conventional, 711 or more. I think that would be a really exciting goal. But again, I'm throwing out a lot of numbers and you don't want to take anything for granted. So again, the initial goal is that 630, then 660 off of a deficit, and then we'll see where that goes from there. But as far as the reasons for why I'm not pulling sumo flat out, to go more into that. So there was a level of interest where it's like, okay, I already hit my goal. My goal was to deadlift 700 pounds. And that's something where I think it's really important within powerlifting is to also know when you're done with something. And that's, you can always keep resetting goals, in perpetuity. That's fine if that's, if your goal is to just end as high as possible. But also sometimes you hit something where I wanted to hit 700. I did at the Arnold. I've actually never shown this footage, by the way, before. And that's that. That's what I wanted. I attempted, over 711 pounds. I think it was 716 in a meet afterwards. And that was when I went to Snap City. And since then, honestly, it's not bothered me at all. I even think at the Arnold, I think I probably could have already hit 716 on that day. Maybe even 720. That 700 felt really, really easy. But it's done. I hit 700. That's all I care about. Stiff bar in a competition. And then as far as other reasons for why I'm not pulling sumo, it's also due to hip pain. I've had anterior hip pain for literally like 5 years just in the background. It's never been debilitating or anything like that, but it's just been this constant slight right hip pain from pulling sumo. And that was on my underhand grip side, where my underhand would kind of push my front hip back a little bit and have a little bit of an asymmetrical lockout, which in some ways is just a natural conclusion of pulling mixed grip with sumo. So that's something that I've also noticed in general is that the way I pulled sumo with a more extended back, which I have tried to undo, but relatively unsuccessfully. I just wasn't as strong if I would have a little bit more of a neutral or even rounded forward back. I've noticed that other lifters like Taylor Atwood, Ashton Ruska, and other lifters I've seen, whenever they have that more extended back, they tend to actually be the ones more injury prone, whereas guys like Sean Noriega, who really control their anterior when pulling sumo, and if anything, they really protract the scapula and have a little bit of a mid-back and even lumbar flexion into their pull, they tend to be the ones who stay healthy longer. So that's also another really positive upside, is that by pulling conventional deficit, it will train me to be a little bit looser. So right now I'm pulling with a really, really flat back, really high degree of extension, definitely less hyperextension than my sumo. I think it's pretty much impossible to actually deficit deadlift with a conventional stance with true hyperextension beyond a certain percentage of load. But that being said, it will gradually pull me forward and I'll get stronger with dynamic spinal flexion and extension, which is a skill you also need to train, and it's useful for day-to-day life. I notice a lot of people get more fragile when they do reduce the range of motion and have great rigidity, but poor control through dynamic movements outside of just hip extension and flexion and knee extension and flexion. So increasing some of that dynamicism, I've already noticed it. From my day-to-day life, my hips feel way better now. My back even feels great. I haven't had back pain in like 8 years, so it's not an issue of pain or anything, but I just feel better moving through a bigger range of motion consistently. So that's also why I would never want to drop deadlifts totally. I think people, again, go too extreme, where they push the powerlifting movement super, super hard, and then they drop everything. And it's like, well, hold on. You still get a lifestyle boost from having those powerlifting movements, sort of like in the Ripito style of just promoting powerlifting for general strength. I still think that's absolutely 100% true.
It is impossible for you to go from 155-pound little skinny fuck to 195-pound useful looking man and not have everybody notice.
I think the barbell lifts are, if anything, still underrated. I'm not one of those people who thinks, you just need to focus on machines and stability and a minimum RPE, and that's kind of the wave on like TikTok and everything. And yeah, there's some validity to it for hypertrophy, obviously, but there is something missing about not loading up heavier movements, especially when it comes to day-to-day life and simply feeling fresh through a big range of motion. When you're getting up in the morning, it just never feels the same if you're only doing hamstring curls and single leg press and all of that. So overall, it's all about finding your why. And for now, there just is no why on any other type of deadlift other than the 2-plate deficit conventional deadlift. Oh, and there is one other reason for why I'm not pulling sumo, and that's because sumo is gay.